dragon on the Hightower. Do you know what color it glows when Old Town calls its banners to war?
Hey, welcome back to Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy. The Hightowers are one of the most important families in Westeros, yet they were completely left out of the show Game of Thrones. In House of the Dragon, we finally get to see the Hightowers in their full glory, but of course, there is a lot of symbolism and history for the Hightowers both in the show and in the books. So we're here to explain how their history, traits, sigil, and words make them the perfect foil for House Targaryen and how their conflict was inevitable. So let's get into it. So first of all, let's talk a bit about the history of the Hightowers and how it compares to the Targaryans. Despite ruling for more than 100 years by the time of House of the Dragon, the Targaryens are still a relatively young house in Westeros. Let me be clear, they are an ancient house because they come from Old Valyria, but they're very new to Westeros. Their history is mainly in Valyria and Dragonstone. By the time Aegon the Conqueror entered Westeros, several great houses were already established, such as the Starks, the Lannisters, and the Martells, and of course, the Hightowers. Now, among the old houses of Westeros, the Hightowers are one of the oldest. House Dane, House Stark, and House Hightower all originated around the same time, and it's not really clear which one came first. But the Hightowers are definitely prehistorical in Westeros. In the world of Ice and Fire, the Maester-Rights, was House Hightower the first men, as most scholars believe today, or did they mayhaps from the men who came before the first men? We cannot know. When first glimpsed in the pages of history, the Hightowers are already kings, ruling Old Town. So, starting off, the Hightowers already have deep roots in Westeros and Westerosi culture, while the Targaryens have none. Now additionally, when we compare the Hightowers and the Targaryens, their house seats, aka the cities where they live, highlight the stark differences between the Hightowers and the Targaryens. The Targaryens live in King's Landing. King's Landing only developed after Aegon the Conqueror landed in Westeros, making it the youngest major city in the continent. The Hightower seat is Old Town, which, as the name implies, is extremely old. Like the Hightowers themselves, it predates known history. In the world of Ice and Fire, the Maester-Rights, how old is Old Town, truly? We simply do not know. The origins of the city are lost in the mists of time. So we're starting off at two extremes, the oldest house in Westeros versus the newest house in Westeros. And to add fuel to the fire, prior to Aegon's conquest, the Hightowers were one of the most important families in Westeros. In Fire and Blood, the Maester-Rights, Old Town was ruled by the Hightowers of the Hightower, the oldest, richest, and most powerful of the noble houses of the Reach. Now the Hightowers were vassals of the King of the Reach, the Gardeners, but they were still one of the strongest houses. But when the Targaryens came to power, they became lower in status because they had two rulers above them.
But if they were so powerful, why did they bend the knee?
Because Aegon the Conqueror had dragons and was not above wiping out entire families. Prior to the Targaryens, the rulers of Highgarden were the Gardeners, and they were very close with the Hightowers. Well, when the Gardeners refused to bend the knee, Aegon the Conqueror literally burned everyone to death. He caused a prairie fire to wrap around their entire army. Now, by the time of Game of Thrones, the Tyrells rule Hightowers. The only reason the Tyrells are rulers is because Aegon murdered every Gardener's son in that battle, and then promoted the Tyrells to become the Lords of the Reach. The Hightowers didn't want to suffer the same fate as the Gardeners, so they bent the knee and lost their status. Additionally, King's Landing made Old Town less important. While it was still a major city and shipping port, now the seat of power was on the other coast of Westeros. So there was bound to be bad blood between these families. A maester even describes their submission as merely delaying a conflict between the two houses. Another huge difference between the Hightowers and the Targaryens is faith. The Targaryens publicly worship the seven gods, but to be honest, they all break a lot of the rules, especially the rule against incest. It's actually a bigger problem for the early Targaryen generations. King Jaehaerys actually creates a special rule so they'll be exempt from these laws against incest, but still, it's considered pretty sketchy. Meanwhile, the Hightowers are a notoriously pious family. They were one of the first families to accept the seven gods, and many younger sons within the family joined the faith. On top of that, Old Town is the holiest city in all of Westeros. It is described as the unquestioned center of faith for all of Westeros, and even a site people pilgrimage to for prayer. Now, their faith is a genuine belief for the Hightowers, but it's also used as a political tool. They use their connection to the Seven to stay out of wars and to protect their city. Now, because their faith and political capital are so intertwined, there were issues between the Targaryens and the Hightowers prior to House of the Dragon. An earlier king, King Maegor, was married to a daughter of a Hightower, and then took several more wives. Now this was against the laws of the Seven, and the High Septa was very vocally against it. Tensions mounted until Old Town was almost burned down, and it was only saved when the Septa suddenly died. Even within the show House of the Dragon, we see how important religion is to Queen Alicent.
Oh, she's at church. That's so real. I know, she's just praying.
She brings Rhaenyra to the Sept to comfort her after the loss of her mother. And most importantly, what truly drives a wedge between her and Rhaenyra is the fact that Rhaenyra had sex and then lied about it. This was a personal betrayal, but it was also against Alicent's religious values. Both premarital sex and adultery is a sin under the Seven, and these are both crimes that Rhaenyra has committed. The Targaryens don't adhere to the Seven gods.
Wait, what's the seven again?
So Westeros was settled in two waves. There were the first men who worshipped the old gods of the Children of the Forest, but then the second wave were the Andals, and they worshipped the seven gods. Basically, the first men worship gods that are more like pagan beliefs, whereas the seven are more like a kind of reinvention of the Catholic Church, with priests, nuns, and various social structures that have political power within Westeros. Now, the Targaryens do not adhere to the seven. Not really. They have sex, they have multiple wives, they are violent and incestuous. Their morals were always going to be in conflict with the Hightowers, especially when they lived in close proximity. So now, let's finally talk about the Hightowers' motivations and traits. In Game of Thrones, each house is primarily motivated by one thing, and this amplifies certain traits. For example, the Starks are motivated by honor and value perseverance, whereas the Lannisters are motivated by greed and value cunning. The Hightowers are motivated by duty and value sacrifice and tradition. I mean, Alicent lays it out right here.
Where is duty? Where is sacrifice?
And this goes hand in hand with their piety. Like I said, the Seven are based on medieval Catholicism, and duty, sacrifice, and tradition are a huge part of the faith. Their duty is to spread the word and adhere to that faith. Septons and Septas sacrifice sex and other worldly pleasures, and every religious ceremony has strict rules to follow tradition. For the Hightowers, their duty is to raise their family line and social standing. To do so, they sacrifice personal desires and uphold pre-Aegon Westerosi traditions. Hightower women are specifically bound by duty, and this is really reflected in young Alicent. One of her first scenes is the tourney for Aemma's birth. Alicent clearly doesn't enjoy all the bloodshed. We see that she's nervously picking at her cuticles to the point of bleeding, but she never tries to leave. She never even looks away. It's her duty to celebrate the king's son, so she stays, despite how uncomfortable she is. It's also very obvious that she views her marriage to Viserys as a duty and a sacrifice. Early on, her father asks if she'll visit Viserys that night, and she replies with,
If you wish it.
And before they got married, there was never any indication that Alicent even liked him, let alone wanted to marry him. But she never actually tries to stop it or fights against her father's plan. Compare this to the Targaryens. Both Rhaenyra and Daemon fight Viserys very hard on who they should marry.
That is because I do not wish to get married.
I take her as she is and wed her in the tradition of our house.
You are already wed.
Rhaenyra even leaves her own wedding tour early, and Daemon takes another bride against his brother's wishes. They both spurn their duty to the realm without a second thought. It's also very clear that sex and children are a duty for Alicent. She does not enjoy the sex that she has with Viserys. He even has to turn her face so she'll actually look at him. She loves her children, but they weren't created out of love. They were created out of duty. She also raises Helena in a similar fashion. Helena doesn't like Aegon. She says it clear as day.
It isn't so bad. Mostly he just ignores you.
But she also doesn't fight their marriage. She has children with him. She does her duty. This is in very stark contrast to Rhaenyra and Daemon, who have sex with whoever they want. Daemon takes second wives and frequents brothels. Rhaenyra has 3 children who are clearly bastards. This is a slap in the face to the morals of the Hightowers. For them, sex isn't about who you want to be with. It's about who you should be with.
Marriage is a duty.
But how is this sacrifice?
Well, remember, Alicent sacrificed her happiness to do her duty. We know that she was once one of the most attractive girls in King's Landing.
You're the most comely girl at court. Why do you destroy yourself?
She also comes from a very good house. Now, I'm not going to lie and say that Westeros treats women well. Many women are just practically sold into marriage.
It is rare for girls in this realm to get a choice between 2 suitors, no less 2 score of them.
But there's a good chance that she could have had a husband her age, a husband that she actually liked. Instead, she had a very unfulfilling marriage that led to a lonely life. In some ways, she sacrificed everything just to raise her own family standing. The Hightowers are also very traditional, both because of their piety and their deep roots in Westeros. This puts them in direct conflict with the Targaryens, and specifically with Rhaenyra. Like I mentioned earlier, the Targaryens are inherently untraditional. They are a very new house to Westeros and still follows some customs of old Valyria. We can't be sure because we know a lot less about Valyria than Westeros, but it does seem like they were more of a gender-equal society than Westeros was. Part of this is because Aegon the Conqueror and his two sister wives, Queen Visenya and Queen Rhaenys. In Fire and Blood, both of his wives are very powerful in their own right. They lead battles, conquer cities, and are very important in decision-making. In fact, the three-headed dragon on the Targaryen crest is to represent Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys. Now obviously, Aegon the Conqueror was still the king, but they definitely had much more agency than a typical Westerosi woman. Also, the High Valyrian language has 4 genders, but none of them are related to biological sex. This means that there wouldn't be multiple terms for rulers of different sexes. Instead of having a king and a queen, for example, it would just be one term regardless of sex. This also makes it seem like gender was less important in Valyria. Westeros, on the other hand, traditionally has severe gender inequality. It is a constant theme in Game of Thrones that the women are bound to specific societal roles.
I will not let you ship her off to Dorne as I was shipped off to Robert Baratheon.
You will marry a High Lord and rule this castle.
No, that's not me.
I should have been born a man. I'd rather face 1,000 swords than be shut up inside with this flock of frightened hens.
The Hightowers obviously believe in this gender inequality. It's clear with how Otto treats Alicent and even how Alicent treats Helena versus how she treats Aegon. To the Hightowers, a woman on the throne is simply wrong. The tradition is that their heir is the closest male relative, and that cannot be broken. Originally, Alicent doesn't want to steal Rhaenyra's crown.
What of my son? Would you have me raise a man to steal his own sister's birthright?
But Otto helps convince her otherwise.
To deny that he is heir to the throne is to assail the laws of gods and men.
And of course, he also frames this as her duty. It is her responsibility to make King Viserys adhere to tradition.
You must guide Viserys towards reason.
Now, Alicent and Otto do adhere to tradition differently. For Alicent, the most important tradition is the king picking his heir. It's why it's such a big deal that she thought King Viserys wanted Aegon to be king.
He told me he wished for Aegon to be king.
But Otto thought the most important tradition was the firstborn son becoming king. He even plotted without her.
Am I to understand that members of the small council have been planning secretly to install my son without me?
They both value tradition, but they don't have the exact same opinions. Even though they're family, they still have their own individual opinions on how to interpret duty and faith. For the Hightowers, duty, sacrifice, and tradition are all interwoven. You have to sacrifice to do your duty to uphold tradition.
You plan to kill them?
It is unsavory, yes. But a sacrifice we must make to secure Aegon's succession.
That's just how it is. There might be some resentments, but ultimately, feelings are not important. And this makes them the opposite of the Targaryen house, which is often ruled by passion. The Hightower motto, "We light the way," also reflects their traits. All mottos on Game of Thrones have a surface meaning and a metaphorical meaning, and "We light the way" is no different. So the last name, Hightower, actually refers to the towers they built in Old Town. These are extremely tall towers with fires at the top. They're kind of like medieval lighthouses. They guide ships into their ports. So yes, literally, the Hightowers light the way to Old Town. But lighthouses are also a great metaphor for the Hightowers. They're stalwart. They never stop their duty. Lighthouses are literally a ceaseless light that is maintained rigorously. Think about the film The Lighthouse by Robert Eggers. Traditionally, manning a lighthouse is really hard. Like, lighthouse keepers basically sacrifice 6 months to a year of their life to do nothing but man that lighthouse. It is a huge sacrifice of time and a huge duty because people will die if you mess up. The Hightowers are all about duty and sacrifice. I couldn't think of a better symbol for them than a lighthouse. Additionally, Old Town is the home to 2 major institutions, the Starry Sept and the Citadel. The Starry Sept is the seat of the High Septon. Light is often used as a metaphor in religious contexts. It can be a metaphor for God, or it can mean enlightenment. Since Old Town is under the control of the Hightowers, they are also lighting the way in a spiritual, religious sense. The Citadel is also in Old Town. The Citadel is the largest repository of knowledge in Westeros and was founded by King Uragon Hightower. Every maester in Westeros goes there to train, and it's also the head of the Conclave, the Order of Archmaesters. We actually see Samwell Tarly train at the Citadel in season 6 and 7 of Game of Thrones. You know, when he saw the library and his face lit up like Belle seeing the East Wing. Now, light is also used as a common metaphor for knowledge. Think about the word enlightenment or the phrase shed some light on the subject. Maesters are the advisors to the king and several lords of Westeros. They're basically a panel of experts to serve served Westeros' ruling class, and they all exist in Old Town, which is Hightower domain. So their words, "we light the way," may also refer to the knowledge that they help spread across Westeros. Both religion and knowledge are common guiding lights for people, and the importance of maesters and septs are repeatedly emphasized in the series. Since Old Town holds both the Starry Sept and the Citadel, the city becomes a symbolic light for the people. Since Old Town is the seat of the Hightowers, they're also associated with this light, giving their words a layered meaning. And finally, let's talk about their sigil. The sigil is a green tower with a green flame on a black background. Now, this is slightly different from the book. In the book, it's a gray tower with a regular flame. Personally, I don't mind this change. Green is a defining color for the Hightowers in both the show and the book, so I think this works. Dark green can mean a lot of things. It often represents ambition and money. The Hightowers are a notably rich family, partially because of the ambition of their ancestors. In the World of Ice and Fire, Lord Jeremy Hightower is quoted as saying, "Highgarden defends our backs so we are free to gaze outwards," and he single-handedly doubled the city's wealth. In House of the Dragon, it's also clear that the family is ambitious. Otto shamelessly plots to engage Alicent and Viserys.
I thought you might go to him, offer him comfort.
In his chambers.
Partially to raise his own family standing. Green can also symbolize renewal and rebirth. Now this is particularly interesting when comparing their colors to the Targaryen colors of black and red. Black is the color of death and mourning. Even the Targaryans wear it as their mourning clothes, as we see at Aemma's funeral. Contrasting the vibrancy of green to the heaviness of black once again highlights how the Targaryens and the Hightowers are perfect foils. The green also makes their sigil more imposing. The Hightowers only glow green when they are at war.
Beacon on the Hightower. Do you know what color it glows when Old Town calls its banners to war?
Green.
It's why it's such a big deal when Alicent wears a green dress to Rhaenyra's wedding. It was like saying that she was at war with Rhaenyra. So, in making their sigil green, it's as if the Hightowers are constantly flying their war colors. Now, we should also mention that green is the color of wildfire, the most corrosive and dangerous substance in all of Westeros. It seems dangerous, but it's likely wildfire that creates green flames in the Old Town Hightowers. Therefore, green is a reminder of how strong the Hightower house can be. They not only have the wealth of the city behind them, but also the military help of Highgarden, one of the strongest militaries and best fed military in all of Westeros. When they decide to go to war, they are as dangerous as wildfire. But are they more dangerous than dragonfire? Not only are the Targaryens one of the most important families in all of Westeros, but they are the perfect family to unravel the Targaryens. They are the perfect foils. Where the Targaryens are newcomers to Westeros, the Hightowers have deep roots. Where the Targaryens are sacrilegious, the Hightowers are pious. And while the Targaryens are motivated by their own wants and passions, the Hightowers are motivated by duty and tradition. It's no surprise that the Greens and Blacks are fighting, and man, I cannot wait to see what happens to them all in Season 2. And guys, we also have videos coming out soon explaining House Targaryen and House Valerian, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. And big shout out to Brianna McLarty, the writer of this video. So what did you guys think will happen to the Hightowers in the upcoming season? Did we miss any symbolism or history? Let me know down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, welcome to the channel. Please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy.